The cemetery was silent, the kind of quiet that made every breath feel louder than it should. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the rows of weathered headstones. An older man, his face lined with years of hard work and quiet determination, stood alone in the fading light. In his hands, he held a shovel, its blade glinting faintly in the dusk. He had come here with a purpose, one that had gnawed at him for decades. Today, he would finally uncover the truth about his grandfather. The man had always been curious about his family's past, but his grandfather's life was a mystery no one dared to unravel. The old man had been a figure of quiet authority, a man who spoke little but carried an air of secrets. As a child, the man had heard whispers, stories of his grandfather's adventures, his travels, and the things he had left behind. But no one ever spoke openly about it, as if the truth was too dangerous to share. Now, standing before his grandfather's grave, the man felt a mix of emotions, fear, guilt, but mostly a burning need to know. He had spent years researching, piecing together fragments of information, until he finally found a clue that led him here. According to an old family document, there was something hidden beneath the grave, something his grandfather had taken great pains to conceal. With a deep breath, the man began to dig. The sound of the shovel cutting through the earth was sharp and unsettling, but he didn't stop. The deeper he went, the more his heart raced. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, as if the ghosts of the past were watching. Finally, after what felt like hours, the shovel struck something solid. The man knelt down, brushing away the dirt with his hands. What he found made his blood run cold. Beneath the grave was a door, a small, rusted metal door, set into the ground. It was old, its edges worn and corroded, but it was unmistakably a door. The man stared at it, his mind racing. What could possibly be hidden beneath his grandfather's grave? Was it treasure? A secret? Or something far more sinister? He hesitated, his hand hovering over the handle. For a moment, he considered walking away, leaving the mystery buried where it belonged. But the curiosity was too strong. With a trembling hand, he gripped the handle and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the earth. A cold draft wafted up from the darkness, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. The man stood at the edge of the staircase, his heart pounding. He knew there was no turning back now. Whatever lay below would change everything. He took a deep breath, grabbed a flashlight from his bag, and stepped into the darkness. The beam of light cut through the black, revealing walls of packed earth and roots that snaked through the dirt like veins. The staircase was steep, each step bringing him deeper into the unknown. As he descended, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the shadows themselves were alive. At the bottom of the stairs, he found himself in a small, dusty room. The air was thick and stale, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with strange objects, old books, jars filled with unidentifiable substances, and tools that looked like they belonged in another century. In the center of the room was a wooden table, its surface covered in papers and photographs. The man approached the table, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The photographs were old, their edges curled and yellowed with age. They showed his grandfather as a young man, standing with people the man didn't recognize. There were maps, too, marked with symbols and notes in his grandfather's handwriting. But what caught his attention most was a single sheet of paper, lying in the center of the table. It was a note, written in his grandfather's familiar scrawl. The words sent a chill down his spine. "If you're reading this, it means you've found my secret. Be careful, for the truth is not what it seems. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed." The man stared at the note, his mind reeling. What had his grandfather been involved in? And what had he left behind? As he stood there, surrounded by the remnants of a life he thought he knew, he realized one thing: this was only the beginning. The man stood frozen in the dim glow of his flashlight, the note clutched tightly in his hand. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind, each syllable heavy with warning. The room around him felt alive, as if the shadows were whispering secrets he wasn't ready to hear. For a moment, he considered turning back, climbing the stairs, and sealing the door forever. But the pull of curiosity was too strong. He had come this far, and there was no going back now. He set the note down and began to examine the room more carefully. The shelves were filled with relics of a life he had never known. There were old leather-bound journals, their pages brittle with age, and small wooden boxes that rattled when he picked them up. He opened one to find a collection of faded photographs, each one telling a story he couldn't yet understand. His grandfather's face appeared in many of them, but the people around him were strangers, men and women dressed in clothing from another era, their expressions serious, even grim. On the table, among the scattered papers, he found a map. It was hand-drawn, with intricate details and symbols that seemed to mark specific locations. His grandfather's handwriting filled the margins, notes that spoke of danger and urgency. One phrase stood out: "The key lies where the river bends." The man's heart raced as he realized what this meant. His grandfather had left behind a trail of clues, a puzzle meant to be solved. But why? What was so important that it had to be hidden away, buried beneath a grave? He picked up one of the journals and flipped through its pages. The entries were written in his grandfather's hand, the ink faded but still legible. They spoke of a life filled with adventure and danger, of travels to far-off places, and encounters with people who were not what they seemed. There were mentions of a woman, someone his grandfather had loved deeply, and a betrayal that had shattered his world. As he read, the man began to piece together fragments of a story. His grandfather had been involved in something far bigger than himself, something that had put him at odds with powerful forces. The journals hinted at espionage, at secrets that could change the course of history. But the details were vague, as if his grandfather had been careful not to reveal too much. The man felt a mix of emotions, admiration for the grandfather he thought he knew, and a growing sense of unease. What had his grandfather been protecting? And why had he gone to such lengths to keep it hidden? He set the journal down and turned his attention back to the map. The symbols and notes seemed to point to a location not far from where he stood. It was a place he recognized, a small town a few hours' drive away, where his grandfather had lived for a time. The man knew he had to go there, to follow the trail his grandfather had left behind. But first, he needed to gather as much information as he could. He began to pack the journals, photographs, and other items into his bag, careful not to damage them. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The room felt colder now, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in. When he was done, he took one last look around the room. The flashlight's beam caught something he hadn't noticed before, a small, ornate box tucked away in a corner. He picked it up and opened it, revealing a silver key. It was old, its surface tarnished with age, but it felt heavy and important in his hand. The man slipped the key into his pocket and turned to leave. As he climbed the stairs, he couldn't help but feel that he was stepping into a world he didn't fully understand. The door at the top of the stairs loomed ahead, a barrier between the past and the present. When he reached the surface, he paused to catch his breath. The cemetery was still and silent, the moon casting an eerie glow over the graves. He looked down at the open door, at the darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly below. For a moment, he considered closing it, sealing away the secrets he had uncovered. But he knew he couldn't. The truth was out there, waiting to be found. And he was the only one who could find it. With a deep breath, he closed the door and began to fill in the grave. The shovel felt heavier now, each scoop of dirt a reminder of the weight he carried. When he was done, he stood for a moment, staring at the freshly turned earth. "I'll find the truth," he whispered, as if his grandfather could hear him. "No matter what it takes." And with that, he turned and walked away, the key in his pocket a silent promise of the journey to come. The man drove through the night, the old map spread out on the passenger seat beside him. The road was quiet, the kind of stillness that made the world feel empty. His mind raced with questions, each one more pressing than the last. What had his grandfather been involved in? Who were the people in the photographs? And what was the key in his pocket meant to unlock? He arrived in the small town just as the sun was beginning to rise. It was a place frozen in time, with cobblestone streets and buildings that looked like they hadn't changed in a century. The town was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before the world wakes up. He parked his car near the town square and stepped out, stretching his legs after the long drive. The map had led him here, to a place his grandfather had once called home. According to the notes in the journal, this was where the next clue could be found. The man didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew he had to start somewhere. He walked through the town, his eyes scanning the buildings for anything that might stand out. The streets were lined with shops and cafes, their windows dark and shuttered. He passed a small church, its steeple reaching toward the sky, and a park where the trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. As he walked, he noticed an old bookstore tucked away on a side street. The sign above the door was faded, the paint peeling, but something about it caught his attention. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, a bell jingling softly above him. The store was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Behind the counter sat an elderly man, his glasses perched on the end of his nose as he read a newspaper. "Can I help you?" the man asked, looking up from his paper. The man hesitated, unsure of how to explain why he was there. "I'm looking for information," he said finally. "About someone who used to live here." "My grandfather." The old man studied him for a moment, then nodded. "What's his name?" The man told him, and the old man's eyes widened. "Ah," he said, setting down his newspaper. "I remember him. He was a quiet man, kept to himself. But there were always rumors." "Rumors?" the man asked, his heart skipping a beat. The old man leaned forward, lowering his voice as if someone might be listening. "They said he was involved in something big. Something dangerous. He left town suddenly, never came back. No one knew why." The man felt a chill run down his spine. "Do you know anything else? Anything at all?" The old man thought for a moment, then stood and walked to a shelf at the back of the store. He pulled out a dusty book and handed it to the man. "This might help. It's a history of the town. Your grandfather's name is in there, along with some others. But be careful. Some things are better left in the past." The man thanked him and left the store, the book tucked under his arm. He found a bench in the park and sat down, flipping through the pages. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. There, in a chapter about the town's history, was a photograph of his grandfather. He was standing with a group of people, their faces serious, their eyes filled with determination. The caption beneath the photo read, "The Guardians, 1945. The man's heart raced as he read the accompanying text. The Guardians, it seemed, were a group of individuals who had protected the town during a time of great danger. They were said to have uncovered a secret so powerful, so dangerous, that it had to be hidden away. But the details were vague, as if the truth had been deliberately obscured. The man closed the book and sat back, his mind reeling. His grandfather had been a guardian. But what had they been protecting? And why had it been so important? He pulled out the key from his pocket, turning it over in his hands. It felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of the past. He knew he was getting closer to the truth, but he also knew that the closer he got, the more dangerous it would become. As he sat there, lost in thought, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. A man was standing across the street, watching him. He was dressed in a dark coat, his face obscured by the shadow of his hat. When their eyes met, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The man felt a surge of unease. He didn't know who the stranger was, but he knew one thing for certain, he wasn't alone in his search. He stood up, clutching the book tightly. The next clue was out there, waiting to be found. And he would find it, no matter what it took. The man left the park, his mind racing. The encounter with the stranger had left him on edge, but he couldn't let fear stop him now. He had come too far to turn back. The book under his arm felt like a treasure, a piece of the puzzle that might finally help him understand his grandfather's past. He found a small cafe on the corner of the street and took a seat by the window. The place was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered around. He ordered a coffee and opened the book, flipping to the page with the photograph of his grandfather and the guardians. The faces in the picture stared back at him, their expressions unreadable but filled with a quiet determination. As he sipped his coffee, he read through the chapter again, paying close attention to the details. The Guardians had been formed in the 1940s, a group of ordinary people who had come together to protect the town from an unknown threat. The book mentioned a series of events, strange occurrences, unexplained disappearances, and rumors of a hidden treasure. But the details were vague, as if the author had been careful not to reveal too much. One name stood out in the text, Evelyn. She was mentioned as a key figure in the group, someone who had played a crucial role in their mission. The man wondered who she was and what had happened to her. Was she still alive? Did she know the truth about his grandfather? He closed the book and pulled out the map he had found in the hidden room. The symbols and notes seemed to point to a specific location near the edge of town. According to the map, it was an old mill, long abandoned and forgotten. The man knew he had to go there. He paid for his coffee and stepped back out into the street. The town was waking up now, the streets filling with people going about their day. He walked quickly, keeping his head down, trying to blend in. The encounter with the stranger had made him cautious, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The old mill was on the outskirts of town, a crumbling structure surrounded by overgrown trees and weeds. The man approached it cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, its windows broken and its walls covered in ivy. He pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards groaned under his weight. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the cracks in the walls. He pulled out his flashlight and swept the beam across the room. The mill was filled with old machinery, rusted and forgotten. But in the corner, he saw something that made his breath catch. A wooden chest, its surface carved with intricate patterns. He approached it slowly, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The chest was locked, but the key in his pocket fit perfectly. He turned it, and the lock clicked open. Inside, he found a collection of letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. He untied the bundle and began to read. The letters were from Evelyn, addressed to his grandfather. They spoke of a deep love, of a bond that had been forged in the face of danger. But they also spoke of betrayal, of a secret that had torn them apart. The man's hand shook as he read the words, each one revealing more about the life his grandfather had led. One letter stood out. It was dated just before his grandfather had left town. In it, Evelyn wrote, "I know you're leaving, and I understand why. But please, don't forget what we fought for. The truth is out there, waiting to be found. And when it is, the world will never be the same." The man felt a lump in his throat. His grandfather had been protecting something so important that he had been willing to give up everything for it. But what was it? And where was it hidden? As he stood there, lost in thought, he heard a noise behind him. He turned, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching him. But when he blinked, it was gone. The man's heart raced. He knew he wasn't alone. Someone else was searching for the truth, and they were willing to do whatever it took to find it. He gathered the letters and put them in his bag, along with the map and the book. He had found another piece of the puzzle, but he knew there was more to uncover. The journey was far from over. As he left the mill, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. The streets were quiet, the town bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. He quickened his pace, his mind racing with questions. Who was Evelyn? What had she and his grandfather been protecting? And who was the stranger who seemed to be always one step behind him? The man didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for certain, he would find them, no matter what it took. The man walked briskly through the town, his bag slung over his shoulder and his eyes darting nervously from side to side. The letters from Evelyn weighed heavily on his mind, their words echoing in his thoughts. He could feel the presence of the stranger lingering in the shadows, a constant reminder that he wasn't alone in this search. He needed a safe place to think, to piece together the clues he had gathered. The town's library came into view, a small, unassuming building with a sign that read Public Library, EST 1923. It seemed like the perfect place to hide and gather his thoughts. Inside, the library was quiet, the air thick with the scent of old books. The man found a secluded corner and spread out the letters, the map, and the book on a table. He began to read through Evelyn's letters again, searching for any detail he might have missed. One letter mentioned a place called Blackwood Manor, a name that sent a shiver down his spine. According to Evelyn, it was where the Guardians had hidden the truth. The man pulled out the map and studied it closely. There, in the corner, was a small symbol that matched the description in the letter. It was located deep in the woods, far from the town. He knew he had to go there, but the thought of venturing into the unknown filled him with dread. The stranger was still out there, watching, waiting. The man couldn't shake the feeling that he was being hunted. As he packed up his things, he noticed a librarian watching him from behind the counter. She was an older woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She approached him cautiously, her voice soft. "Can I help you with anything?" she asked. The man hesitated, then nodded. "Do you know anything about Blackwood Manor?" The librarian's expression changed, her smile fading. "That place, it's not safe. People say it's cursed. No one goes there anymore." "Why?" the man pressed. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Years ago, something terrible happened there. The Guardians, they were the last ones to go in. Not all of them came out." The man's heart raced. "Do you know what happened to them?" The librarian shook her head. "No one knows for sure. But if you're thinking of going there, be careful. Some things are better left buried." The man thanked her and left the library, his mind racing. The more he learned, the more dangerous this journey seemed. But he couldn't stop now. He had to see this through. He drove to the edge of town, where the road turned into a narrow dirt path leading into the woods. The trees grew thicker as he went deeper, their branches twisting together to form a canopy that blocked out the sun. The air was cool and damp, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves under his tires. After what felt like hours, he reached a clearing. In the center stood Blackwood Manor, a massive, decaying structure that looked like it had been abandoned for centuries. The windows were shattered, the roof sagging, and the walls covered in ivy. It was a place frozen in time, a relic of a forgotten era. The man parked his car and stepped out, his flashlight in hand. The woods were eerily silent, as if the animals themselves were afraid to make a sound. He approached the manor cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. As he reached the front door, he noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar, as if someone had been there recently. His heart pounded as he pushed it open, the hinges creaking loudly. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the floorboards groaned under his weight. The walls were lined with portraits, their eyes seeming to follow him as he moved. He shone his flashlight around the room, revealing broken furniture and shattered glass. But what caught his attention was the staircase. It was grand, with a carved wooden banister that spiraled up to the second floor. At the top, he saw a faint light flickering, as if someone had lit a candle. The man's breath quickened. He knew he wasn't alone. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under his weight. The light grew brighter as he reached the top, leading him to a door at the end of the hallway. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small, with a single window that let in a sliver of moonlight. In the center was a table, and on it sat a single candle, its flame flickering in the darkness. Beside it was a note, written in the same handwriting as the one he had found in the hidden room. "You're closer than you think. But beware, the truth comes at a price." The man's heart raced as he read the words. He turned to leave, but as he did, he heard a noise behind him. He spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Standing in the doorway was the stranger, his face still obscured by the shadow of his hat. "Who are you?" the man demanded, his voice trembling. The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. The man backed away, his mind racing. He knew he was in danger, but he also knew he couldn't run. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out something small and metallic. It was a key, identical to the one the man had found in the hidden room. "You're not the only one looking for the truth," the stranger said, his voice low and gravelly. "But you're in over your head. Leave now, while you still can." The man's grip tightened on his flashlight. "I'm not leaving. Not until I find out what my grandfather was protecting." The stranger chuckled, a sound that sent a chill down the man's spine. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just about your grandfather. It's about something much bigger." Before the man could respond, the stranger turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. The man stood there, his heart pounding, the weight of the stranger's words hanging heavy in the air. He knew one thing for certain: the journey was far from over, and the danger was only beginning. The man stood frozen in the dimly lit room, the stranger's words echoing in his mind. "This isn't just about your grandfather. It's about something much bigger." The air felt heavier now, the flickering candlelight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. He knew he couldn't stay here. The stranger was a threat, but he was also a clue, someone who knew more about the truth than he was letting on. The man grabbed the note from the table and stuffed it into his bag. He needed to get out of Blackwood Manor, but he also needed answers. The key the stranger had shown him was identical to the one he had found in the hidden room. What did it unlock? And why did the stranger have one too? He hurried down the staircase, his flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. The manor felt alive, its creaks and groans like whispers urging him to leave. As he reached the front door, he paused. The woods outside were dark and silent, but he knew the stranger could be waiting for him. Taking a deep breath, he stepped outside. The cool night air hit his face, and he scanned the clearing for any sign of movement. The stranger was gone, but the man couldn't shake the feeling that he was still being watched. He returned to his car and drove back to town, his mind racing. The librarian's warning about Blackwood Manor being cursed lingered in his thoughts. What had happened there? And what had the guardians been protecting? Back in his motel room, he spread out the letters, the map, and the book on the small table. He needed to piece together the fragments of the story. The letters from Evelyn mentioned a truth that could change everything, but they were vague about what that truth was. The map pointed to Blackwood Manor, but he had found nothing there except the stranger and the cryptic note. He picked up the book and flipped to the chapter about the guardians. The photograph of his grandfather and the others stared back at him, their faces filled with determination. He wondered what they had been fighting for. What had been so important that they had risked their lives to protect it? As he read through the chapter again, he noticed something he had missed before. There was a mention of a vault, a place where the guardians had hidden something of great value. The book didn't say where the vault was, but it did mention a name, Dr. Henry Blackwood. The man's heart skipped a beat. Blackwood Manor must have belonged to Dr. Blackwood. But who was he? And what was his connection to the guardians? He pulled out the map and studied it again. The symbol for Blackwood Manor was clear, but there was another symbol nearby, one he hadn't noticed before. It was a small circle with a line through it, located deep in the woods. According to the map, it was a few miles from the manor. The man knew he had to go there. It might be the key to unlocking the mystery. The next morning, he packed his bag and set out for the woods. The sun was shining, but the trees were so thick that the light barely reached the ground. The air was damp, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves under his boots. After hours of walking, he reached the location marked on the map. It was a small clearing, with a stone structure in the center. As he approached, he realized it was an old well, its wooden cover rotted and broken. He shone his flashlight into the well, but the beam didn't reach the bottom. It was deep, much deeper than he had expected. He noticed something carved into the stone rim of the well, a symbol that matched the one on the map. The man's heart raced. This had to be the vault. But how was he supposed to get inside? As he stood there, trying to figure out what to do, he heard a noise behind him. He turned, his flashlight beam cutting through the trees. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure standing in the shadows, but when he blinked, it was gone. The man's hands trembled as he pulled out the key from his pocket. He didn't know what he was supposed to do with it, but he knew it was important. He examined the well again, looking for any sign of a lock or mechanism. Then he saw it. On the side of the well, hidden beneath a layer of moss, was a small keyhole. The man's breath caught in his throat. He inserted the key and turned it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud groan, the ground beneath him began to shake. He stepped back as the stone rim of the well shifted, revealing a hidden staircase leading down into the earth. The air that wafted up was cold and damp, carrying with it the scent of earth and something else, something metallic. The man hesitated, his heart pounding. He knew he had to go down there, but the thought of descending into the darkness filled him with dread. Taking a deep breath, he gripped his flashlight and stepped onto the staircase. The steps were narrow and slippery, and the walls were lined with roots that snaked through the dirt like veins. The deeper he went, the colder it became, until he could see his breath in the beam of his flashlight. At the bottom of the staircase, he found himself in a small, circular chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with jars and boxes. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it sat a single object, a small, ornate box. The man approached the box cautiously, his flashlight trembling in his hand. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate carvings, and a lock that matched the key he had used to open the well. He inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open, and he lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of documents, their edges yellowed with age. He picked up the top sheet and began to read. The words sent a chill down his spine. The documents revealed a secret so shocking, so dangerous, that it could change the course of history. The Guardians had been protecting this secret for decades, and now it was in his hands. But as he stood there, reading through the documents, he heard a noise behind him. He turned, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Standing in the doorway was the stranger, his face still obscured by the shadow of his hat. "You shouldn't have come here," the stranger said, his voice low and menacing. The man's heart raced. He knew he was in danger, but he also knew he couldn't let the stranger take the documents. The truth was out there, waiting to be found. And he was the only one who could protect it. The man stood frozen in the vault, the documents clutched tightly in his hands. The stranger's presence filled the small chamber with an oppressive tension, the air thick with unspoken threats. The beam of the man's flashlight trembled as he aimed it at the figure in the doorway, but the stranger's face remained hidden in shadow. "You don't understand what you've found," the stranger said, his voice low and gravelly. "That secret doesn't belong to you. Give it to me, and I'll let you walk away." The man's grip tightened on the documents. He had come too far to give up now. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking but defiant. "Why do you want these?" The stranger took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm someone who's been protecting this secret for a long time. Longer than you can imagine. And I'm not about to let some amateur ruin everything." The man's mind raced. He didn't know who the stranger was, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't let him take the documents. They were the key to understanding his grandfather's past, to uncovering the truth that had been hidden for decades. He glanced around the chamber, searching for a way out. The only exit was blocked by the stranger. But the room was small, and the shelves were filled with jars and boxes. If he could create a distraction, maybe he could buy himself enough time to escape. Without warning, he grabbed a jar from the shelf and hurled it at the stranger. The stranger ducked, and the jar shattered against the wall, its contents spilling across the floor. The man didn't wait. He bolted for the doorway, shoving past the stranger and sprinting up the staircase. The stranger shouted after him, but the man didn't look back. He climbed the stairs as fast as he could, his heart pounding in his chest. When he reached the top, he slammed the stone rim of the well shut and turned the key, locking the stranger inside. For a moment, he stood there, gasping for breath, the documents still clutched in his hands. He knew the stranger wouldn't be trapped for long, but it bought him some time. He ran back to his car, his mind racing. He needed to find a safe place to read the documents, to piece together the final clues. The motel was too risky, the stranger could find him there. He needed somewhere no one would think to look. As he drove, he remembered a place his grandfather had mentioned in one of the letters, a small cabin deep in the woods, a place where the guardians had met in secret. According to the map, it wasn't far from here. He followed the dirt road until it ended, then continued on foot through the trees. The cabin was exactly where the map said it would be, a small, weathered structure hidden among the pines. It looked abandoned, its windows boarded up and its roof sagging, but it was the perfect place to hide. The man pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air was musty, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. He cleared off a table and spread out the documents, his flashlight providing the only light. As he read, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The documents revealed a secret that had been buried for decades, a secret so powerful that it had driven the guardians to risk their lives to protect it. The man's grandfather had been part of a group tasked with safeguarding a discovery that could change the world. It wasn't gold or jewels, but something far more valuable, a scientific breakthrough that could revolutionize energy production. But the discovery had also attracted the attention of powerful people who wanted to exploit it for their own gain. The guardians had hidden the discovery to keep it out of the wrong hands, but they had paid a heavy price. Many of them had disappeared, and those who remained had been forced to live in secrecy, their lives forever changed. The man felt a surge of emotion as he read through the documents. His grandfather had been a hero, a man who had sacrificed everything to protect something greater than himself. And now, the responsibility of safeguarding that secret had fallen to him. But there was one final clue. Among the documents was a note, written in his grandfather's handwriting. The truth is hidden where the river bends. Follow the path, and you will find what you seek. The man knew what he had to do. He folded the documents and placed them in his bag, along with the map and the key. The river wasn't far from here, and he had to get there before the stranger could stop him. As he left the cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The woods were silent, the only sound the crunch of leaves under his boots. He quickened his pace, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. When he reached the river, he followed it until he found the bend mentioned in the note. There, hidden among the trees, was a small cave. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but he knew this was it. He stepped inside, his flashlight illuminating the walls of the cave. The air was damp, and the ground was slick with moisture. As he ventured deeper, he saw something glinting in the beam of his flashlight. It was a metal box, identical to the one he had found in the vault. He opened it and found a single sheet of paper inside. The words on the paper were simple, but they sent a chill down his spine. The truth is yours to protect. Guard it well. The man knew he had found what he was looking for. But as he stood there, holding the paper in his hands, he heard a noise behind him. He turned, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Standing in the entrance of the cave was the stranger, his face still obscured by the shadow of his hat. You're persistent, the stranger said, his voice cold. But this ends now. The man's heart raced. He knew he was out of options. The final confrontation was here, the man stood frozen in the cave, the stranger blocking the only exit. The beam of his flashlight flickered slightly, casting erratic shadows on the damp walls. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in the confined space. The stranger took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. You've come a long way, the stranger said, his voice low and gravelly. But this is where it ends. Hand over the documents, and I'll let you walk away. The man clutched the metal box tightly, his mind racing. He couldn't give up now, not after everything he had been through. The documents were more than just pieces of paper, they were his grandfather's legacy, a secret that had been protected for decades. Who are you? The man demanded, his voice trembling but defiant. Why do you want these so badly? The stranger chuckled, a sound that sent a chill down the man's spine. You really don't know, do you? This isn't just about your grandfather. It's about power. Control. The secret you're holding could change the world, and there are people who will do anything to get it. The man's grip tightened on the box. He knew the stranger was right. The documents revealed a scientific breakthrough that could revolutionize energy production, but in the wrong hands, it could be used for unimaginable destruction. His grandfather and the Guardians had hidden it to protect the world, and now it was up to him to keep it safe. I'm not giving it to you, the man said, his voice steady now. My grandfather gave up everything to protect this secret. I'm not about to let you take it. The stranger's expression darkened. You don't have a choice. Before the man could react, the stranger lunged at him. The two men struggled, their movements frantic in the confined space. The flashlight fell to the ground, its beam spinning wildly and casting chaotic shadows on the walls. The man fought with everything he had, but the stranger was stronger, his grip like iron. In the chaos, the metal box slipped from the man's hands and fell to the ground. The lid popped open, and the documents spilled out, scattering across the damp floor. The stranger's eyes lit up with greed as he reached for them. But the man wasn't about to give up. With a surge of adrenaline, he shoved the stranger against the wall and grabbed the documents. He didn't have time to think, he just ran. The stranger shouted after him, but the man didn't look back. He sprinted out of the cave and into the woods, the documents clutched tightly in his hands. The trees blurred around him as he ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to get away. When he finally stopped, he was deep in the woods, far from the cave. He leaned against a tree, trying to catch his breath, his heart still pounding. The documents were safe, but he knew the stranger wouldn't give up so easily. He opened the box and looked at the documents again. Among them was a final note, written in his grandfather's handwriting. The truth is not just a secret to be kept. It's a responsibility to be shared. Use it wisely. The man felt a surge of emotion as he read the words. His grandfather had trusted him with this secret, not just to protect it, but to use it for good. He knew what he had to do. He returned to his car and drove back to town, his mind racing. He needed to find someone he could trust, someone who could help him ensure the secret was used for the right reasons. When he reached the town, he went straight to the library. The elderly librarian was still there, her kind eyes filled with concern as she saw the state he was in. Are you all right? She asked. The man nodded, though he knew he looked anything but all right. I need your help, he said. I found something important, something that could change the world. But I don't know what to do with it. The librarian listened as he explained everything, the hidden room, the letters, the vault, and the documents. When he was done, she nodded slowly. There's someone you should talk to, she said. A historian who specializes in local secrets. He might be able to help you. The man thanked her and left the library, a glimmer of hope in his heart. He knew the journey wasn't over, but he also knew he wasn't alone anymore. As he walked down the street, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, but the street was empty. The stranger was still out there, waiting. But the man was ready. The man sat in the small, cluttered office of the historian, the documents spread out on the table between them. The historian, an elderly man with a kind face and a pair of round glasses perched on his nose, studied the papers with a mixture of awe and disbelief. This is incredible, the historian said, his voice trembling with excitement. Your grandfather and the Guardians, they were protecting something that could change the world. But they knew it was too dangerous to reveal all at once. The man nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of responsibility. I need to make sure it's used for good. I can't let it fall into the wrong hands. The historian leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. There are people who can help. Scientists, researchers, people who can ensure this discovery is used responsibly. But you'll need to be careful. There are others who will stop at nothing to get their hands on this. The man knew the historian was right. The stranger was still out there, and he had no doubt that others would come looking for the secret. But he also knew he couldn't keep it hidden forever. The truth had to come out, but it had to be done the right way. Over the next few weeks, the man worked closely with the historian and a small, trusted group of experts. They studied the documents, piecing together the scientific breakthrough that had been hidden for decades. It was a discovery that could revolutionize energy production, offering a clean, sustainable solution to the world's energy crisis. But as they worked, the man couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He noticed strange cars parked outside his motel, and once, he thought he saw the stranger standing in the shadows across the street. He knew the danger was far from over. One evening, as he was leaving the historian's office, the man felt a hand grab his arm. He turned, his heart racing, but it wasn't the stranger. It was the librarian, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. You need to leave, she whispered urgently. They're coming for you. Before the man could respond, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see the stranger and two other men approaching, their faces grim and their intentions clear. The man didn't hesitate. He ran, his feet pounding against the pavement as he darted through the narrow streets of the town. He could hear the men behind him, their shouts echoing in the night. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of town, where his car was parked. He jumped in and drove away, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He knew he couldn't stay here anymore. It was too dangerous. But he also knew he couldn't give up. His grandfather had trusted him with the secret, and he had to see it through. The man drove to a remote cabin deep in the woods, a place where he could work in peace. He spent the next few months finalizing the plans for the discovery, working with the experts to ensure it would be used responsibly. Finally, the day came when the discovery was ready to be revealed. The man stood before a small group of journalists and scientists, his heart pounding as he prepared to speak. My grandfather and the Guardians sacrificed everything to protect this secret, he began, his voice steady. They knew it was too powerful to be revealed all at once. But now, the time has come. This discovery has the potential to change the world, but it must be used wisely. It's not just a secret, it's a responsibility. As he spoke, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had done what his grandfather had asked. He had protected the secret, and now he was sharing it with the world. But as he left the podium, he noticed a figure standing in the back of the room. It was the stranger, his face still obscured by the shadow of his hat. The man's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't stop. He knew the danger wasn't over, but he also knew he wasn't alone. The journey had changed him. He had learned the importance of family, of courage, and of the pursuit of truth. And he knew that, no matter what happened, he had done the right thing. As he walked away, he felt a sense of pride. His grandfather's legacy would live on, not just in the discovery, but in the lessons he had learned along the way. The truth had been revealed, and the world would never be the same. The end.